A DC rioter, yes, a regular wannabe terrorist. His name is Brandon Fellows. He says he is being treated like a black person. As a matter of fact, he's being treated worse than black people. Interesting. So they do know black people are treated different in America. Okay, let's put up his picture. Let me give you some background on this guy. One of the defendants who was charged with storming the US Capitol on January 6th, filed a new motion and argued that he and his fellow co-defendants have it worse than black Americans in the South. And then he says in the 1950s. Okay, he doesn't say 1960s, he says 1950s, all right? His name is Brandon Fellows. He is under indictment on a felony charge of obstruction of an official proceeding in connection with the Capitol riot. In the charging documents, prosecutors say Fellows entered the Capitol through a broken window, wound up smoking marijuana in Senator Jeff Merkley's office. Well, representing himself, he has now filed a new motion. He says, and I quote, "I'd like to make this portion of my motion festive in light of Black History Month to show you how correlated our treatment really is. And of course, concede on some clear differences. After all, not only does history tend to repeat itself, but few ever truly learn from it. It's Black History Month. And there's a lot to learn from it. I find these deprivations, discriminations, and unequal treatments to have strong correlations to what my black brothers suffered under the racist Democrats after abolition of slavery. I'm sorry, I'm laughing not to laugh. Okay, thanks to Republican Abraham Lincoln, up until the Brown v. Board of Education decision, which the Democrats also hated. He argued in his 32-page motion. Listen, there's more. Come on, Black Jesus. Okay, he then says, I'm not MLK, but I too speak out about these abuses from a Democratic city-run jail in Washington, D.C., just as MLK from the Democratic City Jail of Birmingham, Alabama. Even my black brothers in Montgomery were able to attend church, have clergy attend school, go to a barber, and see their families, even if they were just segregated. Therefore, I argue to you that as least in these areas, we have it worse than the black population did in 1950s Montgomery. Oh man. Listen, y'all, he ain't finished. He got some more for you, okay? He says, the brief also discusses Fellows' thoughts on Nelson Mandela, critical race theory, Joe Biden, the KKK, Nazis, carjackings, the Taliban, Malcolm X, the NAACP, the Confederacy, former IRS officials, and virtue signaling. Fellows had previously compared himself to Jesus in an October legal briefing. Prior to the court proceedings, they actually let him go. He was told he can get out of jail, all right? Fellows was initially granted pretrial release, big mistake obviously, but was ordered back into custody in June after repeated violations. What were the violations? Including missing court-ordered mental health evaluation and allegedly calling a probation officer's mama. Talk about privilege. And I told you this would happen. The Justice Department also said when a clerk of the court attempted to contact Fellows about another violation, allegations that he was harassing a former girlfriend, it was discovered that he had put the number of the judge's wife's office on the document to contact him instead of his own phone number. And y'all let him go home. What else is he going to think other than he is obviously a privileged individual? He committed an act of domestic terrorism and you all let him go home. Pre-trial release, release on own recognizance. Yes, and think about the irony of the court. They release him on his own ability to never offend again or not to offend for the duration of that time and to come back to court. And as they're releasing him, they say, and you must undergo mental health evaluation. Yeah, makes perfect sense. All right, Mr. Wiggins, thoughts here.
I first want to apologize if I distracted you from me laughing in the background. Okay, so he was clearly referencing Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail.
Right.
Dr. King was arrested some 29 times from unjust laws, not the insurrection, not being a domestic terrorist. So if he's likening himself to that, the privilege of it all to even bring up his name. Never mind the fact that in that very letter, Dr. King talked about the white moderate and never mind. Okay, a fun thought exercise I like to have when people talk about like, well, it was the Democrats back in the 1950s or the Democrats were KKK and stuff like that. One thing I like to say is like, hey, what was their political ideology? The KKK, were they progressive? Were they liberal? Oh, they were conservative. The thing you failed to mention. Oh, you wanted to say Democrat. Got it. Like these things didn't switch. The privilege of this man to be able to go home and see family and friends and freedom is amazing. So honestly, congrats to him for taking advantage of the fact that he gets the benefit of the doubt as a white person in 2022. Something not afforded to black people at any time period in the US, let alone the 1950s America. So good job.
Sometimes I wonder, people like him, when he says, the Democratic Party did this in the 50s, and those were all Democrats, does he really believe that the Democrats of the 1950s are the same people as the Democrats of today or the same platform? Or is he just saying that because he knows it's intentionally confusing? Because the Democrats of the 1950s were Dixiecrats, especially those in the South. And those Dixiecrats were the anti-progress crowd. That is true. But those Dixiecrats left the Democratic Party when it started pulling more and more to the left, more and more progressive. And 100% of those Dixiecrats became Republicans.